This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Isaac Moss, in for Catherine Shen. Quantum technology is set to grow here in Connecticut, with the state pledging more than $120 million to support its development. But what do you envision when you hear the word quantum? Is it Schrodinger's cat trapped in a box? Or maybe a hulking quantum computer locked in a refrigerated room? We'll kick off the hour by trying to get to the bottom of what quantum mechanics actually is and why we're so excited about it. Here to break it all down for us is Chad Orzel. He's the chair of the Department of Physics and Astronomy at Union College and author of the book, How to Teach Quantum Physics to Your Dog. Dr. Orzel, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Do you have any questions about quantum mechanics? Does your dog? Email us at wherewelive@ctpublic.org. So, Chad, let's start with a pretty big question. What is quantum mechanics?
So quantum mechanics, there's several different ways you can introduce it, but one of the one I like best is it's a theory that tells us that everything in the universe has characteristics that we associate with particles and characteristics that we associate with waves at the same time. So particle-like characteristics are things are discrete and countable, right? You have one particle, two particles, three, not 2.5, not pi, right? And waves, on the other hand, are things that are very fluid, and it's a disturbance in a medium that is spread out over some region in space. You can't really quantify waves in the same way. They're spread out, they're delocalized, whereas particles are at a particular position at a particular time, always, right? So they're discrete, they're countable, they're localized. Waves are continuous, they're delocalized, they spread out over areas of space. And everything in the universe behaves that way. Things that we normally think of as being purely particle-like, like atoms, are in fact wave-like. And things that we think of as being purely wave-like, like light, actually has particle nature to it.
Great. And last year was the 100th anniversary of quantum mechanics. So can you give us a brief history of how we got here?
So quantum mechanics comes out of remarkably mundane things. So the birth of the theory comes from Max Planck in Germany trying to explain the sort of cheery red glow that you see if you like toast bread in the morning, right? Get a piece of metal hot, it has that red color. Why is it that color? Planck was trying to explain mathematically the shape of the spectrum of light that comes out of these things. And in order to do that, he had to essentially introduce the idea that energy comes in little packets that are related to the frequency of the light. Essentially, he was assigning some particle character to the light. Einstein picked that idea up and ran with it to explain something called the photoelectric effect. And then a few years later, Niels Bohr, looking at a completely different problem, why hydrogen atoms emit particular colors of light, picked up this idea from Planck and Einstein and used it to say that atoms have these discrete energy states within them. An electron orbiting the nucleus of an atom can only orbit at certain radii. It will never be found in between them. Those states have particular energies, and the electron emits or absorbs light as it moves between two of those special orbits. And the frequency of the light is related to the energy in the way that Planck and Einstein had introduced. This is what really kicks off quantum mechanics. That happens in 1913. And then there's about a decade of people fumbling around trying to make all of these pieces fit together in a sensible way before in 1925, first Werner Heisenberg and then Erwin Schrödinger came up with complete mathematical models that explain why there are these special states, give you the tools to start to handle this particle nature of light and understand how things go, and then everybody's off and running.
And can you give us some clarity? Why was this discovery a big deal?
It's a big deal because prior to that, nobody understood a lot of these phenomena. Nobody understood why hot things glow that particular color. It's a very simple, very universal phenomenon. Doesn't matter what you heat up. If you get it to the same temperature, it will glow the same color. And that was really baffling to physicists. Nobody understood why atoms absorb and emit very particular colors of light. This was empirically known since the early 1800s and was used to discover new elements. Right, as early as about 1870, people are discovering completely new elements by seeing spectral lines that they couldn't match up to any atoms that we knew about. But nobody could explain why that was, and that sort of thing really itches at scientists, and people needed to find a way to explain these things. And then once they did, it unlocks an enormous amount of technology, because if you understand how atoms behave in a quantum manner, you can start to make things like lasers and do remarkable technological development. And that really kickstarts an enormous amount of stuff.
Awesome. And our listeners might have heard of some popular conceptions of quantum, such as the Heisenberg uncertainty principle or Schrodinger's cat. Can you tell us a little bit about these popular conceptions of quantum mechanics?
So the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is something that expresses a limit on what it's sensible to talk about for one of these things that have both particle and wave character. So what you want to say is it tells you that you can never know both the position of a particle and its momentum, how fast it's moving, basically, at the same time. You can never know both of those things arbitrarily well. If you know more about one of them, you know less about the other. And this happens because the momentum is related to the wavelength that's associated with the particle. So if you try to make something that's very well localized in position, it's just kind of, there's a one spike where you find it, and everywhere else there's nothing. That doesn't really have a wavelength that goes with it, right? You can't really say what the wavelength of that thing is. On the other hand, if you want to have something where you can measure the wavelength really well, know its momentum very well, it needs to be spread out wide enough that you can count a bunch of wavelengths and measure that very precisely. But then you don't know where it is, right? It's sort of spread over a large region of space. And there's this trade-off. The best you can hope to do is to have a small region of space in which there's some wavy stuff going on. And that gives you a pretty well-defined position and a pretty well-defined wavelength, but both of those things will be uncertain, and in a way that corresponds to this Heisenberg uncertainty principle.
Awesome.
So it's a limit on what it's possible to know about the state of something that is behaving like both a particle and a wave at the same time.
Great. And can you tell us a little bit about the legendary cat in the box?
So Schrodinger's cat is a thought experiment. Erwin Schrödinger came up with a wave version of quantum mechanics in 1925, 26, and was instrumental in founding the theory, but he got disenchanted with it for philosophical reasons. And his parting shot as he left the field to do something else was this thought experiment involving a cat. And the idea is that you take a cat and you seal it in a box, so you can't see, hear, smell what's going on with the cat. And in the box, you put a device that has a 50% chance of killing the cat in the next hour based on the decay of a radioactive isotope. And what he said is, ask the question, what is the state of the cat at the end of the hour? Now, quantum mechanics, common sense would say the cat's either alive or it's dead inside the box. You don't know which, but it's one or the other. But quantum mechanics would say that, well, the atom is in a superposition of both decayed and undecayed at the end of the hour. It's a microscopic thing. Everybody agreed that that's how quantum particles work. But that means that the cat must also be in this superposition of alive and dead at the same time until you open the box and see which it is. And that struck Schrodinger and other physicists of his generation as just a completely outlandish state of affairs. And so, he rejected that and wanted nothing more to do with the theory. And people have been arguing about the meaning of that thought experiment ever since. But we can show now, just very recently, there's an experiment where people are using these little nanoparticles with thousands of atoms of sodium and making them be in two places at once, be in that sort of superposition state, even though they're fairly big objects. It's, several thousand atoms of sodium, and it behaves like a particle and a wave. It's delocalized. It's in two places at the same time, just like the Schrodinger cat.
Cool. And what do you think draws people to quantum mechanics?
A lot of it is the weirdness. Honestly, I got into the field in part because of things like the Schrodinger cat, Heisenberg uncertainty principle, and saying like, wow, that's really strange. I want to understand more about how that works. There's also the fact that it's an enormously powerful theory in terms of building technology, right? We know how to make semiconductor chips because we understand that electrons behave like both particles and waves, and that profoundly changes the way that they behave as they move through a material. Knowing that allows us to manipulate the properties of semiconductors and make, billions of tiny little transistors on computer chips that power, the computer that we're using to talk to each other, and all of these AI things now. If you want a chat bot to tell you that you're awesome, right, you can do that because we understand that electrons behave like both particles and waves, and that changes how they move through materials.
And we've heard these words quantum computing get thrown around a lot. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
So the idea of quantum computing is it's doing computation not with classical bits that are definitely zero or definitely one, but with quantum bits that can be in a superposition of zero and one at the same time. They have this particle wave behavior. They're sort of delocalized. They're in multiple states at once, and that gives you a much richer system to do computer things with, right? And furthermore, you can have these bits sort of correlated with each other in ways that are stronger than you could do with bits in a classical computer. And both of those things, this phenomenon of superposition and this phenomenon of entanglement, are things that give you the ability to do certain kinds of computations that are very difficult to do on a classical computer. So you can do these things much more efficiently. You can, with many fewer steps, you can go through these computations. And so that's very interesting. Some of these problems are incredibly important. The big money one is factoring large numbers is sort of the key to a lot of cryptography. A lot of codes that have been used in the last several decades are based on it being very hard to factor a large number on a classical computer, but there's an algorithm that would let you do that much more efficiently on a quantum computer. And so spies and bankers have poured a lot of money into trying to make quantum computers that would allow them to crack these codes.
Cool. And over this past 100 years, can you give me a sense of the current state of where we're at with quantum research?
The current state of where we're at, things are very highly developed, but also moving very, very fast. The quantum computing business has changed enormously just in the last 5 or 6 years. The number of bits that you can get in a quantum computer that you can access in a commercial kind of way has expanded incredibly. Right now, people are routinely using machines that have 100, a couple hundred of these quantum bits in it. So like that's really taking off. There's also over the last 20, 30 years, there's been huge advances in laser technology and cryogenics and things like that that enable us to really isolate these simple quantum systems and understand and explore their weird properties in very deep ways that even when I was a graduate student, things that seemed impossible are now fairly routine. So it's a really exciting, fast-moving field.
Cool. And could you give us a sense of what these quantum computers look like? I'm guessing it's not just like a run-of-the-mill laptop.
No, the quantum computer, you see these pictures of these things that look like, beautiful golden chandeliers. And really that's deserves like a special Nobel Prize in public relations for whoever at IBM figured that out. Because all that is that's the plumbing. That's the wires to connect to the quantum computer, which is actually a tiny little chip, like a centimeter square, that has a bunch of little semiconductor things on superconductor things on it that act as the quantum bits. And when it's operating, all of that gorgeous, shiny metal plumbing is inside a big dull gray can that's full of liquid nitrogen and then liquid helium, to get the superconductors down to within a fraction of a degree of absolute zero, where they can do the quantum things that they do with them. So if you actually see one in operation, it's very disappointing looking compared to those chandelier in the garden sort of pictures that they have in all the press releases.
But these technologies sound quite expensive as well, right?
Yeah, it's not cheap stuff. There's a lot that goes into making these, and some big companies, IBM, Google, Microsoft, have put a lot of money into developing these systems and building out this quantum capability. There are also a lot of smaller startup companies that are doing this with other kinds of technology. So it's been, the original funding for this mostly came from government grants, and it's become more commercial over the last 10 or 12 years.
From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Where We Live. I'm Isaac Moss. Coming up, we'll hear all about quantum developments here in Connecticut. We'll also hear from a scientist who is developing games to educate middle schoolers about quantum mechanics. You've been hearing from Dr. Chad Rozelle. He'll stay on with us. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Isaac Moss, in for Catherine Shen. Look at your fingernails. Can you see them growing? No? That's because they grow a nanometer a second. Quantum technology can help us see at that scale, but few people have access to it. Connecticut is looking to change that. The state is also hoping to expose younger students to the ideas behind quantum physics. We'll hear why that's important and how teachers are exploring those concepts. Now joining us is Christine Broadbridge. She's the founding director of CCSU's Center for Quantum and Nanotechnology and the executive director of research and innovation at SCSU. Christine, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Isaac, and thank you for the invitation. I'm pleased to be here.
Also joining us is Emily Edwards. She's an associate research professor at Duke University and co-leads the National K-12 Education Partnership. Emily, excited to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Still with us is Dr. Chad Rozelle. So, Christine, can you give us a picture of what quantum research currently looks like in Connecticut, and how did this all get started here?
Absolutely. So quantum research has been here for quite a bit of time, as you just heard from Chad. With the institutions, Yale, UConn, and, very active engagement. But really with Quantum 2.0, there's been a huge acceleration. So you heard a lot about the history of quantum from our previous discussions, but with Quantum 2.0, looking at the acceleration of technologies in Connecticut, we have University of Connecticut, Yale University, but just a large number of academic institutions, as well as industries that are really benefiting from those technologies. So what we're really looking to do is to amplify that, really, and look at how we can bring that to the general public. That's part of it.
What is Quantum 2.0? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So for some of the technologies that we've heard about in their everyday life, from semiconductor technologies to MRI, those were made possible by quantum, that quantum that we talked about, that really, is 100 years old. But if we think and drill into really the manipulation of information, or QIS, quantum innovation sciences and engineering. That's about exploiting superposition and entanglement, two things that you've heard about, to manipulate information, very carefully manipulate and exploit that careful, knowledge about information for things like sensing, communication, as well as computing. So if we talk about quantum 2.0, people very often think about the computing aspect. Quantum computing is extremely important and something that, as you just heard from your guest, is making some rapid accelerations. But quantum sensing is already here. There are some developments in quantum sensing that are already hitting industry in the state of Connecticut, as well as industries that include medicine that are hitting our general public in terms of applications. So if you really think of 2.0, you think of 1.0 as with us indirectly using quantum phenomenon. With 2.0, the technology has come to the point where we can more directly tap into the quantum phenomenon of entanglement and superposition to make new technologies.
Cool. And you talk a little bit about manipulating information. What does that look like, and what kind of facilities do you require to do all this kind of stuff?
Absolutely. So really, when you think about it, there's a wide range of different facilities. And I'm going to talk a bit about the Center for Quantum and Nanotechnology at Southern Connecticut State University. And so a lot of the instrumentation that we have worked on, has been around for a bit of time, these nanotechnology facilities, because material science and engineering plays a really important role in all of these discoveries. The manipulation of matter at that nanometer level, when you talked about, billionths of a meter, or just how much your nail grows in 1 second, that's some advanced technology that's needed in order to come up with the new materials that are required to come up with new sensing devices, new computers, and new communication devices. So, one of the things that's really important about quantum phenomenon, it's very sensitive. And so that's why you need to have very cool environments, and you need very pristine and very carefully developed materials.
And we just heard Chad describe these, enormous quantum computer plumbing, I guess, but now we're talking about nanotechnology. Can you help us visualize what these facilities actually look like?
Absolutely. So, when Chad talked about the disappointment of what's inside of that chandelier, as a physicist and engineer, I'm pretty excited about that. So what's inside of that is a little tiny chip. And those pretty and tiny chips are really important to us. They're inside of our cell phones. So, but in order to make those chips, you need to have very precise instrumentation that can draw pictures and take, down to the nanometer, very precise level. Companies like ASML do that. And so that's the kind of equipment that you need to create these very small semiconducting chips. But there are other modalities for quantum computers that, potential ways to implement them that folks are working on all in parallel. And so that's one thing to mention as well. It's somewhat of a race, which is pretty exciting. You asked why people, I think, are drawn to quantum. I think some of it is the excitement in the field right now. It's just not knowing where it's going to go. We really don't. And there are so many people that are involved in it now. I think it's getting more young people excited about science again. It's sort of like that excitement around how we were going to get to the moon. Right now, there's a race, right, to think about what we're going to do with quantum. And the excitement is around just really life-changing opportunities for this technology.
So, Christine, you talk about getting more young people into quantum, and you talk in your press release for the renaming of the Center for Quantum and Nanotechnology about the expansion of K-12 outreach. Can you tell us a little about those plans?
Absolutely. So one of the key, most important pieces we feel about this is engaging with educators, teachers, because we feel like those are the individuals that are in the classroom. They're the ones that are involved with individuals as early as K. Beyond that. So we do a lot of educator professional development, but we also work with the community, and that is working with local museums, the Connecticut Science Center, others that do out of classroom engagement. And so the feeling is taking this very, high-end science, that seems complicated, and bringing that into everyday examples, and as much hands-on as possible. And that's where our center comes into play, because the center is designed to engage folks as early as possible in research opportunities, which we feel is really important. Most people feel as though research, that idea of developing new knowledge, is not accessible to unless you have a PhD, unless you have a very advanced degree. And we want to make sure that folks know that they can get involved early. And that tends to be the thing that connects people. That's the glue that brings them in. Once they get their hands active and they get involved in the development of new knowledge and technology, they can better see themselves in that place as being someone that can contribute and engage.
Amazing. And still with us is Emily Edwards. She's an associate research professor at Duke University and co-leads the National K-12 Education Partnership. Emily, how are you seeing quantum mechanics being taught in the classroom?
It's a really great question. There's some quantum already be in the classroom, especially in chemistry, high school chemistry classes, where students learn about atoms, the periodic table, how light and matter interact with each other. All of that is sort of baked into chemistry, which many students already take in high school. It's just sort of hidden, a little bit like how we experience quantum is just hidden beneath. We might experience it like Chad was saying through, in the morning, looking at the toaster oven glowing or whatever. But the what's happening to the atoms just beneath the surface is something we can't see. And it's a little bit about how quantum is in the curriculum. It's there in many places, or there are inroads there, but teachers may not know about them, or they may not know how to talk about them quite yet. And so one of the things we work on with the Q12 partnership is to try to support teachers finding ways to talk about this and help different school districts across the country figure out ways to not just talk about the science and connect it to modern, technology areas, but also how to talk about careers. And so when I think about quantum education at the K-12 level, I really think about how we are either broadening science education or really infusing it into what already exists and providing another avenue for students to explore. At the earlier levels, I think, students are ready for that exploration. We need to give them credit that they are explorers by just by design. Little humans walk around asking questions all the time and they're looking for answers. And I think that they may not be ready to do matrix mechanics, of course, which is sort of the mathiness that Chad was talking about that was developed in the 1920s. But they're ready to hear answers and real answers about how nature operates and what's happening just below the surface. So I think there are a lot of opportunities. Games are another one we can talk about. But I don't think that quantum is something new so much as because it's been around for a while, so much as a part that maybe needs to be elevated in the curriculum.
Awesome. And speaking of games, can you tell us about your work designing games to teach quantum concepts?
Yeah, so I'm not alone. A lot of people have really gotten into the I don't know, I don't know what business is not the right word, but they've gotten into making fun ways for students to learn about science. This idea has been around forever. Students do all kinds of informal learning through watching videos, playing video games, playing board games. And so there are a lot of quantum themed games out there. And one that I've been involved with University of Chicago and University of California, Santa Barbara has been to build out a quantum game called Quander. And that game is really focused on letting students learn about the mechanics of quantum computing through both gameplay and exposure to the concepts. So it's been a really fun project. And right now we're working on developing offline card games around it and a board game as well.
Awesome. And so, but why teach young students about quantum mechanics?
Sure. I mean, okay, so I think that there's sort of the academic in me feels like we should be telling students the truth about nature to the best of our ability. And if, quantum mechanics is still a little bit from Chad because I've known him a while, that it's one of the greatest human achievements in science. It is our best explanation for how nature operates at certain energy scales, at certain small, you talked about things being very small. It's our best explanation. So we should be telling students about it. So for the academic in me feels like it's sort of the way forward in physics education, in chemistry education. And then from the from the career standpoint, students just need to know what's out there as opportunities. And so they're not going to, if we wait until students are in undergraduate or really graduate school to tell them about, oh, by the way, there's these, jobs in industry where you can build these interesting devices for computing and sensing and networking, then we're really missing a whole pool of students that could be working in this area. And then I think just broadly, the future and even just our current society, we know is filled with data and computing. Quantum's part of that story. Students need to be equipped with the tools to navigate that future, to make decisions about it. Even if they don't work in quantum, they may have to make a decision about some piece, some widget, how it's used in their community, or just really maybe they need it for some other purpose. There might be spin-off technologies. There's all kinds of aspects about this that are related to the broader landscape of data computing, and we just need to be including that for younger students. Again, I don't think we need to be teaching the math of entanglement to kindergartners, but we need to be offering students the opportunities to be exposed to different tools that they may need to be encounter in the future.
That's so cool. And Chad, can you respond to what we just heard from Emily and Christine?
I think I definitely agree that the earlier you can get people exposed to these things, the better, and it's very good for students to have a broader sense of the options that are out there in the world. And it's also, it's a neat thing, right? The world is weirder than it seems to be. When you drill down to the microscopic level, and some of that persists even up to fairly large scales, and that's pretty inspiring and just generally enriching as sort of a human, right? I teach at a liberal arts college, and we try to cross lots of disciplines, and this is interesting in all sorts of ways. It has profound implications for how we think about the way the universe is organized and operates, and can lead to completely different understandings of many things in the world that transform your life. And I think that's a valid thing, whether anybody ends up working with it or not. Just knowing that the world is as strange as it really is can be a profoundly transformative experience.
Awesome. And Christine, you talked a little bit about creating more opportunities, inroads to careers. Can you tell me about the practical applications of quantum research that you're looking at?
Absolutely. So the work we're doing is what we call use-inspired research. So working with industry, industries throughout Connecticut, but more broadly, to look at opportunities where they have an inspired, a question that they're looking to solve, and then really getting our students engaged and working with them to do that. So, back to the question of why we want to get folks involved as early as possible, we're going to need them. If we look at projections for quantum technologies, in particular in the state of Connecticut, with our industries, including aerospace, pharmaceuticals, finance, all of those industries are targeted to need individuals with quantum knowledge. So those with STEM backgrounds, but also those without STEM backgrounds. So those that are STEM literate, so those that are understanding, what quantum is. And so back to the work that we do in the center that we have here, we think the best way for people to learn about quantum and any of these technologies is by engaging with that to solve problems. And they tend to get very excited by those problems that are motivated by a topic an industry topic or even a topic that's societal of interest. So we have students working on topics that relate to environmental sustainability as well. Realizing that quantum is going to it's projected to solve some of these major problems, environmental, pharmaceuticals, as I mentioned before, finance. There's a lot of opportunity, and in particular in the state of Connecticut with our industries.
Awesome. And
to just bounce off that real quick, there's a very old joke in computer education that somebody asks, "What's the best way to learn to program?" The answer is have a problem that you need to program a computer in order to solve.
Absolutely. I love that one. I'm going to steal that one from you, Chad. There's a bunch I'm stealing from your book, by the way.
Thanks.
And Chad, when it comes, looking at another field of technology, when it comes to things like AI technology, there have been a ton of anxiety about its applications. Do you have any concerns about the applications for quantum?
Not that much, really. I think the killer apps, as I said, are these factoring of large numbers, which sort of threatens security of various codes and things. But that's still a fairly long way off. That the quantum computers that we have now are not able to do those problems at a scale that's interesting in the sense of being threatening to codes and that sort of thing. The kinds of things that you can do with current quantum computers are mostly in the vein of quantum simulation, which is basically you look at a system that's inherently quantum, like a bunch of electrons interacting with each other in a superconductor or a magnet, or a bunch of atoms interacting with each other in a complicated molecule. Those can be very hard to simulate with a classical computer because it takes a lot of resources to account for all of the quantumness of the things that are interacting. If you do that on a quantum computer, you can just kind of map, one quantum bit to one atom in your complicated molecule. And then you can do some of these simulations with many fewer bits in the computer and with many fewer resources and probably do those kinds of things much more efficiently, and which may be enormously useful for things like designing exotic materials, understanding the properties of drugs and things like that. So that's the really exciting area. It's not as concerning as some of the AI stuff that goes on.
Well, I'm
Yeah,
glad. Go for it.
Sorry, if I may add to that, I teach this semester. I'm teaching science communication and policy to some master's students who are doing tech policy and ethics. And one of the questions we do talk about is this question about well, are the ethical concerns for quantum the same as the ethical concerns like that you were asking about for AI? And when we talk about the different societal concerns, and I agree completely with Chad said, and I think it helps to consider where these are at and what they look like and what are the kind of concerns we have. So, for example, we're concerned with the energy uses of AI. Again, if you go to a quantum lab is either these dilution refrigerators, these chandeliers that Chad talked about, or they're atoms and lasers. Okay, those are kind of the two main look and feel of a quantum lab, and they're very small and they do consume some amount of energy, but we're not talking about things that look like these huge data centers. If I would say the overlapping ethical concerns, if I had to say what they were with quantum and AI, if there were any overlap, it's really around education, access, and ownership. Who gets to own this stuff? Who gets to access it? And who gets to have access to education around it? So I often nowadays talk about workforce development and education, and quantum is sort of in the pillar model, the fourth pillar. We talk about sensing, networking, and computing. Workforce development and education is that fourth component, whether it's cross-cutting, foundational, or pillar, whatever model or picture you have, framework you have. But that's where it does overlap with AI, is this ownership, access, and education. And there are lots of ethical questions there, and they are not unique to AI and quantum. It's pervasive across a lot of deep technologies.
And, just to add to that, I think I agree completely. But I think part of this is we're sort of at the stage right now with quantum that we were with AI not that long ago. And I don't think we knew there were going to be the ethical issues with AI that are here now. So I think that, I think getting folks involved in this discussion as early as possible, meaning that is a wide variety, in terms of the population are engaged with making the decisions. So I think to your point, Emily, it's about education. It's about making sure that everyone has as much opportunity to engage with these new technologies and be really instrumental in driving the direction, right, that they're going to go.
Amazing. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Where We Live. I'm Isaac Moss. We're talking about the weird world of quantum mechanics today. You've been hearing from Dr. Christine Broadbridge, Dr. Emily Edwards, and Dr. Chad Rozelle. They'll stay with us after the break. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Isaac Moss, in for Catherine Shen. Still with us is Christine Broadbridge, founding director of the CCSU Center for Quantum and Nanotechnology. Also on is Emily Edwards. She co-leads the National K-12 Education Partnership. And finally, Chad Rozelle. He's the chair of the Department of Physics and Astronomy at Union College and the author of How to Teach Quantum Physics to Your Dog. So, Emily, can you tell us, what do you think excites young people about physics and about quantum mechanics in general?
Right. So I think, Chad and Christine touched on this a little earlier. I think students are, especially at the early ages, elementary, early middle school, I think they're excited by this unknown, we look at the sky. I always talk about how quantum loses to astrophysics all the time as an educational field, because you can look at the sky and be awed and inspired by stars and other celestial objects. And then the simulations they do of black holes merging are just so impressive. But I would argue that the invisible to our naked eye, the invisible world of quantum, particularly with the part of quantum that we use for quantum information science, this low energy part, these small objects, these very cold objects, this part is equally inspiring to students, and particularly because it's this unknown. And that's also what I think lends it to sci-fi. At early or later ages where students are kind of figuring out where they belong in science and math, ages 12, 13, older, I think they're starting to see themselves in careers. They start to look for role models. And that's where I think we play a big role as people in this community, trying to tell the stories of what it's like to be a scientist, what it's like to work in a science and engineering field. And I think this actually really inspires students. Middle schoolers are, I have one, I guess she's almost a high schooler, but they're very good detectors at fake and falsehood and false energy. They're just really good at telling whether or not you're being authentic. And I think they look for role models who are authentic and make them feel like they belong. Later in high school, I think it's much more complicated what they're thinking about and what inspires them, because they're bogged down with a lot of coursework and decisions. And so that's a much different space. But at these early ages, I think we're really looking at explorers and figuring out how to belong in science and see themselves in that future.
Amazing. And Christine, I turn to you. What does the ideal future of quantum in Connecticut look like?
Absolutely. I think it's really that integration of quantum into all of the technologies that we're so strong in. Really the land of innovation. If you think of our preeminence in advanced manufacturing, aerospace, finance, pharmaceuticals, medicine, those are all areas where quantum is really set to maximize. So I think that I see as an important piece, but also, my passion is making sure that everyone in the state has that opportunity to benefit from these technologies. And so, making sure that those in the community are understanding as early as possible about what their potential role could be in this is a key piece of this. And then also the idea of all of our academic institutions in the state working together. So I think it's really us becoming an engine, which we are really set to be, an economic engine, where, quantum, it has its home, but also has an international reach in terms of benefit.
Amazing. And Emily, we only have a couple of minutes left, but in the past year, we've seen a ton of National Science Foundation grant cuts, with most of them being in education. How has this impacted your work and science education in general?
It's a really great and timely question. I appreciate you asking it. It's a tough one. So I'm going to take my hat off of a person who receives federal funding and just say, as a member of this community and an expert in the field, that the cuts and the like sort of chilling of the climate of K-12 education investment has really affected teachers and students, and it effectively, the National Science Foundation is one of the main agencies that supports science education learning, from the research to the implementation. And it supports teachers directly by providing curriculum so that everybody doesn't have to go it alone. There's not a for-profit single solution or a single state that can go it alone in science education, and quantum education is included in that. And so my particular programs, the National Q12 Education Partnership, the GAME program, they've not been directly affected because partially, I think, because I'm not inside the heads of those who made these cuts, but because quantum is in front of them. But truly, a lot of other programs have been, and the shrinking of the budgets and the not spending the budgets. These programs have gone from K-12 education being supported at the hundreds of millions dollar level at NSF, which is still a drop in the bucket, but from the hundreds of millions of dollars to the tens of millions or even $1 million. Some of programs have vanished altogether. And in particular areas of data science, chemistry, physics, all of these are the supporting areas of quantum education, and quantum education can't survive if we don't actually invest in science education. So I think it's a great question. I think the answer is, if our federal government stops this funding and chills the climate and gives the message that it's no longer important and people have to go it alone, that directly hurts teachers and students in Connecticut and across the country, not just one place, everywhere.
Thank you. And Chad, we'll close with you briefly. What are your hopes for the future of the field of quantum?
I look forward to seeing the continued advancement of these technologies that are just doing incredible things with the ability to manipulate very small quantum systems, very large numbers of these quantum bits, and even the ability to make bigger and bigger things behave in a quantum manner. That just keeps revealing new and fascinating features about how the universe we live in operates. And I think that's one of the most amazing achievements of human civilization, that we understand things at this tiny nano scale that we can't even see, through the power of the scientific process and reasoning about the world.
Thank you. You've been hearing from Christine Broadbridge, founding director of the CCSU Center for Quantum and Nanotechnology. Also Emily Edwards, who co-leads the National K-12 Education Partnership. And finally, Chad Urzell, author of How to Teach Quantum Physics to Your Dog. Thank you all for being with me here today. I'm Isaac Moss, in for Catherine Shen. Today's show was produced by me, Isaac Moss. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. Did you like this episode produced entirely by young people? Then you'll love our upcoming event. Janae, take it away.
Hey, my name is Janae Spinato, one of the hosts of Young People Hate the Radio, a new Connecticut public video series all about fine-tuning the static of young adulthood. We're having a launch party on February 12th, and we'd love to see you there. We'll have guests like Bradley on a Budget and Alexa Curtis. We're going to be talking about all things money, dating, and fashion. Get your tickets at ctpublic.org/vlog. That's ctpublic.org/V as in Victor, LOG. See you there.